You are listening.
You're listening.
You're listening.
You're listening
To a TVO Today.
TVO Today.
to a TVO Today. TVO Today
Podcast.
The following podcast contains coarse language, descriptions of violence, and sensitive themes which may not be suitable for younger audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Previously on Extradition.
He came to me, he said he wants to go to Central Asia. I said, look, don't do that.
I get a call at 8. Chris, Hussein's been detained. Can you help us? I said, well, this should be simple. We'll just call Ottawa, and he should be out in a couple of days. And it was pretty clear that they had, at that time, no interest in dealing with us. There's zero proof anywhere that he's done anything with a terrorist intent. They tried to suggest he was...
someone named Guler Dilavar.
Yeah, zero evidence of that. He was an activist for culture and language, but he's not a terrorist.
Have you been in communication with Hussein?
We lost all communication with his family who had been seeing him.
Well, my background's complicated, I guess. Usually I just consider myself sort of a world citizen at this point, in a sense I don't really have a particular country that I'm tied to.
World citizen Gene Bunin does have an interesting background. Originally from Russia, he's lived all over the place. In the US, Switzerland, and for a long time, China. While living in China as an English teacher, he visited Xinjiang and became curious about the Uyghur culture and language, so much so that he became fluent in Mandarin and Uyghur. During his time in Xinjiang, he had many projects, a book that aimed to preserve the Uyghur language, and another on Uyghur restaurants. Things were going smoothly for Gene, until 2017, when the region changed dramatically, and he began to witness the mass securitization and surveillance of Uyghur Muslims.
You know, like a lot of people that you knew weren't there anymore, and you can always ask where they were. There was security checks everywhere and metal detectors. There were tanks in the street, more police in the street. That just became a more and more common sight. The message was that we're going now to protect stability, and we're gonna stop all sorts of incidents or uprisings or these kinds of things.
But this didn't happen all overnight. It was a slow and creeping transformation into a whole new Xinjiang.
The public square that before would just be open now would have walls and like a metal detector. And then like the next year you would have a metal detector, but it actually detected something, and there was like a guard next to it who would like check you if it detected something. And then the year after there would be that, and plus there would be like walls and fences around the whole thing. So it was just like this sort of gradual increase in security equipment.
Pretty soon, Western media outlets began reporting on what was happening.
Both the UK and the US have accused China of violating human rights as reports emerged of Uyghurs being forced into internment camps, women being sterilized, and the use of forced labor.
Human rights campaigners say that over 1 million people have been interned in concentration camps in the far west province of Xinjiang.
There are many accounts of people who have had their relatives disappear into the camps, and we don't really know what's happening to them.
A new report says that China is separating minority Uyghur children from their families and placing them in boarding schools while their parents are in detention camps.
Uyghur prisoners in the western region of Xinjiang are shot on sight if they're caught trying to escape.
Meanwhile, the Chinese government and media were working hard to refute any of these claims.
First of all, I would say there's no so-called labor camps as you described. There's what we call vocational education and training centers. They are there for the prevention of a terrorist.
这种建议，但是我们拒绝任何无端的指责。
Please don't ask questions in such an irresponsible manner, but we reject groundless or unwarranted accusations.
Exactly. But let me tell you this. Have you been to Xinjiang yourself?
No, I never have.
You know, Xinjiang is regarded as the most beautiful place in Xinjiang.
先听自己了解完。
That's also my suggestion to anyone who tries to judge Xinjiang. They should really get to know the place first. We in Xinjiang live as freely as fish in the sea.
In 2019, the Chinese government gave select Western media, including the BBC, a tour of one of these so-called re-education camps. To me, the images broadcasted were bizarre. Uyghurs singing and dancing, as if their culture was celebrated, and as if learning Mandarin was voluntary. The song you're hearing was written by President Xi Jinping. The lyrics translate to, "Resolutely refrain from doing bad deeds. Be upright and frank all your life." For Xinjiang Bunin, that's not what he witnessed. In 2018, Gene realized that his time in Xinjiang was up.
I was called into the police station, and they talked to me for like 3 hours, basically. They took me from my hotel room and just talked to me for 3 hours about what I was doing, if I was an undercover journalist. Because I at that point, like, I was living in this mostly Uyghur city at the height of this incarceration crisis. I spoke Uyghur. I knew what was happening. I was frequently posting about it, maybe not extremely explicitly, but fairly, still giving a lot of details on Facebook. So I was basically like an independent reporter. But I was there on a tourist visa and a 10-year visa that they couldn't wait for it to expire. And so they found this other way to make me leave. And so they that's where they closed the hostel where I was staying. It became just a totalitarian police state. And then people started disappearing. Then a lot of things were monitored. And then that was just on a whole new level.
Gene left before it was too late. He was one of the lucky ones. But he never forgot what he saw, and once safely out of Xinjiang, he made it his mission to make sure others would see it too. Which is how I knew about Gene in the first place. You see, Gene's goal is to expose what the Chinese government wants kept secret. That includes where Huseyin Celil may be held, the Xinjiang #1 prison. I'm Yusuf Zine, and this is Extradition, the search for Huseyin Celil. Chapter 2, Last Known Location. Xinjiang Bunin now lives in Taiwan and is running a website known as the Xinjiang Victims Database.
I kind of got the idea that it would be good to start keeping track of all of this, just to have this evidence. One as to have the evidence, and to have a place where if you had maybe, if somebody was afraid to speak up about what was happening to their family, they might be less afraid to do so if they saw that, thousands of other people had already spoken up.
So Gene built a database that hosts over 78,000 Uyghur inmate profiles. Men, women, and children, with information related to their detention, including their charges, their ID numbers, and their likely current location. Sure enough, Hussein had a profile on the database, and his current location was still the Xinjiang #1 prison, which is also how he signed off his last letter released to the public in 2008. The database had two goals: provide a resource for families who had loved ones arrested, and expose the disinformation of the Chinese government.
And they're really sensitive to people calling them out and tarnishing their image. They'll go to great lengths to try to hide it, even when it's extremely awkward and incredibly obvious what they're trying to do.
Our investigation and evidence found their so-called database to be based on lies, perjury, and slander.
Has the Chinese government ever come after the database and tried to shut you down?
In the early days, we got a lot of different cyber attacks. I mean, the worst that has happened to me so far is that I've been kicked out of certain countries. There's definitely risks, but what can you do? I mean, they did in 2021, I think, finally comment on us publicly in one of their press conferences.
China Global Television Network, that's China's main state-owned English-language broadcaster, even denied its accuracy, quoting Chinese official statements.
And they said, they gave statistics. They said 7,000 of them are living peaceful lives.
Over 6,900 people on the Xinjiang Victims Database are living normal lives.
Like 3,000 of them are serving criminal sentences for violent crimes that they committed.
Over 3,200 are in prison for criminal acts.
Like 1,000 we could not find, and they do not exist. They're fake. They just concluded that they're fake.
And they say more than 1,300 of those on that list are a total fabrication.
Zine gets his information from multiple sources: international and Chinese media, family testimonies, and leaked internal documents. Through all of this, he can cross-reference the data to ensure the information is accurate.
And so often you have cases where somebody's reported as detained in one document. We add them to the database and we see, okay, they're also listed in all these other documents. And so we check and we add the additional info, and then you have all this cross-corroboration.
It's labor-intense and non-stop work, and there's no way to know for sure if every detail in Zine's database is accurate or up to date. But his research showed that Hussein was still in the number 1 prison. Nothing to indicate that he had moved, was released, or died in prison. This gave us a boost. It meant we were still on the right track.
Xinjiang prison, it's the central prison in Xinjiang. So I would say probably it's the most high-profile prison, in a sense that that's where the most high-profile detainees are, the most sensitive ones, the most political prisoners. It has an address, which we know.
Hussein's letter, published in the Globe and Mail, had given us the name of the prison, but Zine's database gave us the exact address: 215 East Hebei Road, Urumqi. There were even coordinates.
That particular facility, I think, is about 20 years old. It's one of the oldest. It's sort of it's the mother prison of a lot of other prisons. So there's a part of Urumqi, and the Xinjiang number 1 prison is in that part, where you basically have 10 detention facilities within 2 kilometer, 3 kilometer, 5 kilometer radius of each other. So it's like a little prison park almost.
Using satellite imagery from Google Maps, we plugged in the coordinates. To us, it seemed like a pretty ordinary facility. It even looked like there was a giant soccer field in the middle of the property. It didn't look like a prison at all. I didn't know what I was looking at or for, so I found someone who did.
The main work that I did was this project where I was trying to find this network of detention camps in Xinjiang in China.
Alison Killing is an investigative journalist based in Rotterdam. Originally working as an architect and urban designer, she realized her skills could be applied to investigating prisons.
We mapped out forced labor in the camps, looking at the factories there. We did a reconstruction of one of the camps to sort of talk about what life was like inside there. And then we also tried to measure how many people we thought that this network had been built to hold. And we came to a number of just over 1 million people without overcrowding.
1 million people. That was hard to comprehend. With the few confirmed prison and camp locations, Alison looked at China's satellite imagery on China's version of Google called Baidu to see what she could learn.
We knew for certain that they were camps because journalists had visited them. But as I was zooming in on the satellite imagery, this light grey square would suddenly appear as I zoomed in. And then it would you'd zoom in further and it would be gone just as quickly. It kind of happened almost in the blink of an eye.
Instead of seeing the facilities they had expected to be there, the Chinese satellite imagery just showed a big gray square blocking out that entire location. This was what tipped off Alison.
And then I found the same thing happening at the other locations that we knew were camps. And then we were maybe this is a technique that we can use to find the rest of the camps.
Wow. It's like by covering themselves up, they inadvertently reveal themselves.
Yeah, here's a big map of all of the secret locations in Xinjiang.
Yeah.
Right? And we were successful in finding what we think is pretty close to being the full network.
Her work exposing the vast camp network in Xinjiang resulted in a 4-part series on BuzzFeed News and won her a Pulitzer Prize in international reporting.
Do you want me to open up Google Earth?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
We asked Alison to pull the location of the Xinjiang number 1 prison on Google Earth and explain to us what information she can glean from just looking at the satellite imagery. My co-producer, Kevin Young, and I sat in our basement office and stared at the images, quickly appearing on a TV screen. Tiff Lamb, our producer, also joined via Zoom. Allison started to take us through it.
So there's the number 1 prison here that you guys are looking at. It doesn't have guard towers, but it's got these really heavy wall around it. And these like nicely laid out or like very formal gardens as well.
Right.
Places.
Yeah, it's a lot of greenery.
Surrounding the number 1 prison were a lot of residential neighborhoods and businesses. But then, to our surprise, there were more prisons.
You've got a detention center right here. You also got this prison here.
Lots more prisons.
And then just north, there's this whole road with 4 or 5 prisons on it. Here's 2 on the other side of the road. Here's another one. Yeah, that is also one. And then this really big one up here too, which actually goes like right along.
We counted almost 10 prisons or detention centers within a 1 kilometer radius of each other. And this was just one part of one city. According to Allison, many of those are offshoots of the number 1 prison.
This area that's in front of the sort of main detention compound, think is admin buildings and buildings for the police and for the guards. And then, look, you've got all of these sports facilities as well.
That's something that it stands out to me is there's so many like soccer and like basketball fields and courts.
Yeah.
That's just for the staff?
Yeah. Those ones would be for the staff because they're outside of the fortified area.
Allison started to point out the architectural details of where Hussein was held. She zoomed in closer on Google Earth.
So we've got this really thick perimeter wall, but on either side of it, there's also this layer of barbed wire fencing, and there's only one layer. And what that means is that this is a medium security prison. The high security prisons have 2 layers of barbed wire on each side, and that's something that we know from looking at the Chinese prison building regulations.
The Xinjiang Victims Database also had many of the tender and procurement documents about the prison. Most interesting were a bunch of construction bidding announcements for things like a police station building in 2012, and in 2017, a fencing purchase and installation agreement, as well as more solitary confinement units.
So we've got guard towers along the wall as well, at the corners with these like blue roofs.
The watchtowers, are there just security personnel in those watchtowers? Are they armed?
So what we know from the prison building regulations that the towers are required to have like good sight of the compound. And it's not just sight of the compound, but they should be able to like fire across the compound. So there should be a good shooting angles. The rate of expansion of the prison estate has been very rapid and massive expansion, which is because of this massive detention program that was being established in Xinjiang.
Within the facility were several buildings shaped like the letter X.
I guess they're cell blocks.
So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It was 6 in one large cell block. And I mean, if you were to estimate how many inmates could be held.
So that's 4 meters by 9, 36 square meters. So that could be like, I don't know, maybe it's 9 or 10 people.
That's approximately 9 to 10 people per cell, in an area about 2.5 times as big as a parking space. I asked Allison if the jail had always looked like this, or if this was a new renovation. Within seconds, she pulled up satellite imagery from 2002.
Oh wow, you can go back in the years. Wow.
Allison jumped through the satellite imagery from the last 20 years. It showed the rapid construction of the number 1 prison and the surrounding area's expansion into a prison park.
So we've got imagery from 2002 where they've laid out the compound, they've laid out the road network within it, and they've got some of the external walls going up, and they've got some buildings and some of these blue roof buildings, which are probably factories, they're up. And then the next imagery that we have is from 2005.
Wow. Okay. This is 2005. Is there 2006 by chance? It's just that was the year Hussein was.
June 2006. Yeah, and at that point, it also looks like there's more factory buildings built, and it looks like those factories are active. You've got materials which are being stacked up outside, and it looks like maybe they're storing materials.
The satellite imagery from the year Hussein was detained in the number 1 prison shows a fully built compound covered in a thin layer of snow. Not nearly as expanded as it is today, but it was developed enough to start housing hundreds of detainees.
Kind of looking at the satellite imagery, the big thing that I would say is like the level of fortification of these places. People are coerced to be there. And that's something that the architectural features implied, but it's also then backed up by the eyewitness accounts that we've heard. Yeah. Nobody has told us that they went there voluntarily.
Now, could it have been just infrastructure to build the prisons? Like, you said like cement or whatever else. Could it?
No, I think that it was forced labor.
Okay.
I think there was forced labor going on there.
The key giveaway for a prison with potential forced labor were blue roofs. According to Allison, a facility with a blue roof indicated it was a factory, which meant the facility was being used for labor. As Allison scrolled over other prisons in the region, the majority of them had these same blue roofs. Forced labor in Xinjiang prison factories is something that has been widely reported on. The region is responsible for producing and exporting 20 to 25% of the world's supply of cotton and tomatoes. Meaning, if you buy a jar of pasta sauce that says made in Italy or Spain, that might be where the tomato paste is processed, but it's quite likely the actual tomatoes come from northwest China. And according to multiple reports, including the Business and Human Rights Resource Center as of September 2022, some of the companies that were allegedly found using cotton sourced from Xinjiang include Adidas, Puma, Hugo Boss, Amazon, Costco, H&M, Zara, Nike, Ralph Lauren, Shein, Temu, and Walmart, just to name a few. Thanks to Uyghur activists in the US, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act was created to ban any imported goods from Xinjiang into the US, unless the supplier can prove they were not made with forced labor. As of recording this in 2024, Canada has no such law. Some of these brands have since cut ties with certain Chinese suppliers. Others have started internal investigations and audits. But there's still a high risk that much of the cotton we wear is sourced from Xinjiang.
Prisons in Xinjiang all have enterprises affiliated with them.
Here's Gene Bunin again, the man behind the Xinjiang Victims Database.
Like, you still have the system where every prison has a few enterprises that are headquartered there, and basically the people who produce things for that enterprise are the inmates. So it's prison labor, essentially.
Today, the number 1 prison hosts Huaxin Bona Trade and Commerce Limited, a corporation and subsidiary of the Huaxin Rayon Group. They produce a variety of products, but seem to focus more on textiles, such as clothing, shoes, and hats. Which means, if that is where he is, Huseyin Celil could be subjected to forced labor. Gene's database lists over 800 people housed at the number 1 prison. Our best bet at finding out about Hussein is to find someone who saw him in prison. The problem is people don't want to talk. Many go into hiding as soon as they're released, and relatives are often scared about speaking out due to fear of reprisals. Thankfully, we found someone who was willing to speak about their experiences in a Xinjiang prison.
I got arrested in 2013, August 19th, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Abduweli Ayub was a teacher, a linguist, and a poet. Someone who cared about preserving the Uyghur language and was trying to teach the next generation to do the same. In the summer of 2013, Abduweli was in the middle of painting his new kindergarten for Uyghur children, which was getting ready to open for students in a few weeks. All of a sudden, a car that Abduweli didn't recognize pulled up outside.
And 2 guys came out from the car, and there is no license plate. And then they came and put the black hood on my face, and they pasted my mouth with the plastic, and then they handcuffed my hands, and then they drove me to somewhere, and they took me to the interrogation room. On the wall there were electric stick hanging, and chains, shackle hanging, and it was really scary at the time.
Abduweli found himself in an unknown location surrounded by police officers.
And in the interrogation room, there is a cage, iron cage. Inside the iron cage, there was a chair. I know that chair because I have learned that from the book, but I have never seen in my life. That's tiger chair in Chinese.
Picture a black chair made out of iron bars. In the front is a contraption that shackles your hands. Your feet are also shackled to each side of the chair legs. All the while you're sitting on a flat and cold iron seat. The chair also has suction cups for legs, so it quite literally does not move, and neither do you. The UN Committee Against Torture in Geneva declared the tiger chair to be a cruel form of torture. People reported to have been kept in the chair for hours, sometimes days. China responded saying that they are used to ensure the safety of the detainee from either escaping or hurting themselves. They also said the tiger chair was actually very comfortable and sometimes had soft padding to increase a sense of comfort.
I sat the tiger chair, and then they stabilized my hand rest and my ankle and my neck with some special equipment. It means that I couldn't move. And in front of me, there were 3 interrogators. One is Chinese, another 2 is Uyghur. They accused me of inciting separatism, overthrow the government, being spy for foreign agency.
These charges were almost identical to what Huseyin Celil was charged with. The charge of being a spy came from Abduweli's time spent in the United States. In 2011, he earned a master's degree from the University of Kansas in linguistics.
I was under the surveillance for almost 2 years after I returned from the United States. I know I was under surveillance because when I make any phone call, I know there is an echo. And I could realize someone was sharing those phone call with me. So I assume that was my time. It was my turn.
In order to get Abduweli to confess to his alleged crimes, they began using different techniques. And just a word of warning, some of the details of this testimony deal with sexual abuse and are difficult to listen to.
They used electric stick to get my confession. It's really hard. Could you imagine? When you feel really hurt, you just wanted to vomit. And when you feel really hurt, you shivering, you're shaking, your hands and your body was shaking. That was a feeling when you were touched with electric stick. Those interrogations started 3 o'clock in the afternoon and lasted about 6 hours.
Abduweli was then escorted to a small cramped cell where 15 other men surrounded him.
They asked me to take off my clothes. I take off my shirts and pants and shoes, and then they asked me to take off my underwear. And then I feel it's dangerous. They asked me to take off my underwear and asked me to bow down. And then I just hold my back, and then I cried, no. They were evil. They were laughing at me and called me weak. They were evil. And I remember they were laughing, just laughing and teasing me and clapping my back. It is a really painful memory. And I don't want to tell in detail. It's really sad and it's really hard to describe. Sorry.
The next day, Abduwali was transferred to another detention center, the number 3 Pretrial Detention Center in Urumqi. As the name suggests, it's where people go to await their court dates. And we know, from the database, that Hussein was held there 2 years earlier, before he was sent to the number 1 prison. Judging by the time between his transfer to China and his sentencing hearing, it's likely he spent about 10 months in this facility. Here, at the number 3, Abduwali would again be subject to more interrogation by police and prison guards.
It's interesting, they took different pictures. They asked me to smile, took the picture, and they asked me to walk, took the video, and they asked me to have a conversation with them as a normal person, and they asked me to laugh with them, and they took all the videos. And I'm thinking that maybe they were preparing to tell the world that, look, we treated him so good. He was laughing when we are talking, and we were talking as a friend.
Inside the cell, the conditions were almost unlivable. According to Abduwali, the 6-meter-long and 3-meter-wide cell had no windows, a few cement beds, and 1 metal toilet without a cover. Each cell had about 10 to 13 people in them, sometimes more. Often there weren't enough beds for everyone, so people took turns sleeping on the cold, hard floor. Mounted on top of the wall, however, was a flat-screen TV.
The TV screen always there, and from 6:30 in the morning, we have to listen to the speech, and those contents are about, this is Han Chinese culture, clean, civilized. This is Uyghur culture, old, backward. I can tell you one example that, it's really interesting that they sexualize Uyghur. Uyghur lady is very furry. There are fur on their body. It means that sexually they are very hunger. And that's why they have a lot of baby. And so it's really hard to listen to it because it deliberately demonizes, sexualizes Uyghur culture. In front of their eyes, Uyghurs are wild grass, they have to cut off. Uyghurs are patient, they have to treat.
And that's playing all day in the cells.
Yeah. Those pictures always on the screen. It continuously happened until end of 2013. And I tried to kill myself because from those interrogation, I realized that I will be in life imprisonment because those accusations were very heavy, like spying for foreign intelligence and overthrow the government, separatism and terrorism. Those things are not the easy stuff.
Abduwali eventually signed and confessed to the false allegations. He was sentenced to 15 months. After serving his time, he left China and relocated to Norway, where he now lives with his family.
So it's a nightmare for the people. And I put myself in Celil. We call him Celil Karim for respect. And I put myself in Celil Karim's position. I felt disappointed.
When I asked Abduwali about Hussein, he couldn't help but draw comparisons to his own experiences.
It's the same place. I don't think it's really a different treatment. Both are political prisoners and both related to foreign countries. I stayed in the US and he is Canadian citizen. So it's the same. Building and everything that even the Chinese propaganda on the wall, it's the same.
The difference is that Abduwali was eventually released. The horror of what he went through makes me wonder about Hussein. What is Hussein's mental state like today? And why is he still being detained?
Just imagine, Celil is inside. You will lose your hope. I think he would felt disappointed. And then, because of number one, the prison for political prisoners, most of them life imprisonment. It also put psychological pressure on you. It's really hard, actually. And I really don't understand why Canadian government take any meaningful action to save Huseyin Celil. That's not only saving Huseyin Celil, that's saving the hope, actually. We need hope right now. We need hope. We need somebody can help us. Not all of us, just one. If Canada can save Huseyin Celil, it means that Uyghur people will be saved.
Hi there. I'm a journalist working for TVO. I'm trying to get information on a specific individual who's being currently detained in China. I'm just wondering who's the best person to speak to about that.
Just wait a second.
Okay. I planned on contacting the Canadian government, both past and current political leaders, but I started with the Chinese embassy in Canada.
Okay, so you can contact our press office.
Okay, and that's the press department. Is there a department where someone might be able to know more details? Because we're really seeking details or information.
You can contact them and let your phone number, maybe. Okay, they will contact you back, okay?
Okay, but is there actually another department that deals with like cases like this, other than the press department?
No, I don't think so, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so have a good day. Goodbye.
I didn't want a press department. I wanted someone higher up who could give us more than an official statement. But no big surprise being denied there. Next, we tried the Canadian embassy in China.
For information on international developments, please press 5. For all other inquiries, please press 6 or press star. To hear these options again, your call will be transferred to our voicemail service.
They didn't answer, multiple times. So we tried Global Affairs Canada. It was hard to tell which number to call, though. We tried one for Citizen Services.
Canadian Citizen Services, hello, bonjour.
Hi there. I'm a reporter for TVO. I'm calling to get any information about a man named Huseyin Celil who's been detained in China without consular service. We've been calling different departments and not really getting through to anyone, so I thought I'd try this line.
Sure, yeah. So the way it works with Global Affairs is for any type of media reporters, you have to send the request by email. And we have a team specifically designed for that. So if you want, I can give you their email address.
Sure. We wrote to Global Affairs and waited for a response.
Yeah, I guess bringing it to you, like, what if you were in our position? What would you do?
I went back to Gene Bunin to get his thoughts on where to look next. His idea caught me by surprise.
I mean, I would find the Chinese speakers and call the prison. You could just like cold call some of the prison staff and ask them if they know anything about Huseyin Celil. That's very untraditional because they're not gonna know how you got their number, who you are, and it's gonna. But it's sort of a wild card in the sense that who knows? Like, I think it's worth trying. I mean, if I were in your shoes, I think I would try this.
Before I could even ask how we would even find these phone numbers, Gene paused and began typing into his computer.
And let me just see this document that we got the staff at the prison from, because I think some of them might even have phone numbers for all of them. Let me just look really quickly. Yeah, they do all have phone numbers, actually.
Okay.
So yeah, they all have mobile numbers. That could be one thing to pursue. Let me also just generate a file for you with all the police officers who work at the prison and their phone numbers.
Gene shared with us a spreadsheet containing 40 names of the staff and police working at the number 1 prison, and all of their phone numbers. I was shocked. It felt like Gene had just handed me a key to the number 1 prison, and potentially Huseyin Celil.
But it's a crapshoot. Like, I think there's a very high chance that they won't. But then I just gonna tell you that Huseyin Celil was there when I was working there, and he was in the cell.
All we need is one.
Next time on Extradition.
It is impossible to compete with a nation state when it comes to maintaining your own cybersecurity.
I can't believe I'm doing this.
It's a long shot, but I think this is kind of the best lead we have.
哎，你好，您这边是新疆第一监狱吧？
你哪位？
I'm now a little bit worried.
How paranoid should we be?
Don't go to China or Hong Kong.
Ever.
Yeah.
Extradition is written and produced by me, Yusuf Zine, and Kevin Young. Tiffany Lamb is our producer and editor for TVO Today podcasts. Kevin Young is also our audio engineer. Our story editor is Michelle Shepard. Our legal counsel is Willa Marcus. Production support from Jonathan Hallowell, Ariana Longley, Vito Tagarelli, Jeff Kusura, and Jennifer DeRosa. Artwork by Jasmine L. Kurd. Katie O'Connor is managing editor for podcasts and digital video at TVO Today. Our executive producer of digital for TVO Today is Lori Few. John Ferry is vice president of programming and content for TVO Today. Theme song and music by Blue Dot Sessions and Audio Network. Extradition is produced by Innerspeak and TVO Today.